So let's say you're finding the next trillion-dollar company and you're finding that. Do you think it's going to come from India, China, or US, where you are currently investing into, and which industry it's going to be from?
I love India. I know people on Twitter might not always see this because I say a lot of negative stuff because I feel strongly about it. But I love India. I would love India to succeed in many ways. But when I see the kind of companies that get built in India, these are not technology-forward companies, in my opinion.
And like Meta, they talk about we're not going to hire software engineers in 2025, even though some of my friends said they hired two after he said that. So there is a huge conflict in things said in Bay Area in some events versus these big CEOs saying, oh, software engineering is over.
The real answer, I think, is...
Do you think US economy is on a rise or decline since we see revenue of Tesla and Uber at least declining?
I think the reason why racism against Indians is happening right now is because people have seen...
Hi everyone, today we have Deedy here who needs very little introduction, but I'm still going to give a big introduction. So Deedy, who is known on Twitter for talking about H1B, racism against Indians, which recently happened, tech, AI, investing in India, investing in America, and the future of tech industry. We're going to talk about all of that and giving some background about you as well. You started your journey at Cornell. You did computer science, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then you became engineer and then started with Meta to Google to, then you went back to India.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you became a lecturer and you wanted to see the tech industry?
Yeah, I mean, let me start with this, I think I'll talk a little bit about my online writing and then I can talk about, sort of the journey too. The reason I like to write online ever since, you might have found me out from Twitter, but my initial thing, the first thing I did online at all was when I wrote this article on Quora about the ICSC and CBSE hack that I did in 2013, and that sort of went very viral. And essentially what it was, I scraped all these results from all of the ISC results, ICSC results, CBSE results, and you could see very clear anomalies in how the grading works. And so I thought that was quite interesting, and clearly there was something fishy going on. I published that, and then it went super viral and everyone on the media picked it up. And ever since then, I sort of got that really nice positive feedback loop where I'm like, look, if there is an audience for writing online, I do want to share stuff that kind of helps people. I'm sure you relate to that as well. I'm not much of a video creator. Obviously, you're better at that. But so I began to write online, and since then, many things have gone more or less, attention, but I really enjoy the idea of giving back to people. Like, I really don't write online to do any sort of influencing or money, any sort of things like that. I really appreciate it when people give me input in my journey, and so I just want to give it back.
And you came back to the US and had a powerful start. You started with Glean AI. You were a founding engineer, and that AI for enterprises has the highest engagement rate in any company for AI. Investors are worried that AI is not used as often they want to, but your startup has the highest engagement rate. We're going to talk a lot about that too soon. So first, let's start with H1B. I want to talk about, what do you think is the future of H1B, future of US? There is actually decline in US economy as well. Tesla is being boycotted all over the Europe recently. And not just that, US companies' revenue is also declining outside, because if you take Uber's revenue is declining because US dollar is becoming powerful. So it's, even though in other countries like India, Japan, if they make the same amount of money, it's going to come back lower in US dollars. What do you think?
Well, let me leave the dollars and the macroeconomic output aside for a bit, but I'll talk about the general H1B situation. And I think, the place I want to start from is obviously the easier place to start from is just talking about immigration and intent to immigrate. But the harder place to start from is if you look at what's sort of happened in America over the last, I would say, 30, 40 years. There's this interesting crisis point that's happened within America where so many immigrants have come in that they've wanted. America's always been the land of immigrants. They've brought in all these high-skilled immigrants in, but really, America hasn't taken care of their local population as much. And I think it's worth talking about a little bit because, there's a lot of conversation around racism and all of this other stuff that happens online. But I think it's important to talk about why America feels this way. And if you grew up in America, and I have some friends who have, it's like imagine you grew up in a country where everything is too expensive, you are not making enough money, your taxes are insane. Paying for high school, a good high school in America costs as much as college, $40,000 a year. You have no way of even getting that. And for you to see, oh, well, there was someone who just studied in India and he's come and they're making twice as much as I ever made because they could get cheaper college, that's pretty reasonable education. So that's where a lot of the anti-immigration sentiment comes from. And I get it. Like, I don't, condone the racism, obviously, but I get where that comes from. But at the same time, India just has a surplus of talent and they're just looking for a place to use it and that gives it back to them. So I can see where the two ends of this sort of rope are pulling. I don't know how it ends up in the future, but I do think if you take a very long-term outlook, the very long-term outlook is simple. Populations in developed countries are declining. They don't have replacement rate. At least for the next 20 years, India is going to see a huge spike in population. There's going to be more and more people of working age, and other countries are going to want to suck that up eventually. Because they will not have enough supply domestically to meet the demand. And so I think, there will be a couple of regulation issues in the short term. Maybe it's bad in the short term, some things happen. But one way or the other, if America stops immigration, they're not going to solve that problem. What's going to happen is those jobs are just going to go to India at an even cheaper rate. Companies work in capitalism and they need to make money. So whether it's getting labor from one place and bringing it on site or using it off-site doesn't really matter for companies. So, I think in the long run, it'll all be fine. In the short run, we'll see. I know it's a pretty non-committal answer, but it's a very tough question that a lot of countries, I think, are grappling with at this point.
Totally, I agree. People who are born and brought up here, when, they have these opportunities in front of them, they take the citizenship, the rights in the US for granted. When we come from limited privileges, when we see these privileges in the US, we work harder to get them.
Absolutely.
So that's that's where the gap comes, and that's also one of the reason Indian community is the highest earning in the US. Not just no comparison. 90,000 is number 2. I don't know which ethnicity, but number 1 is Indian Americans, 120K. Wow.
And I tell my friends this all the time, which is, in the beginning of when I was, starting out my career, I was a little younger. A lot of people would ask me, "Yeah, but तूने IIT नहीं किया?" And IIT was always a big deal. Everyone in India knows about IIT, but me specifically, I was very close to it because I went to Fiji for 4 years. I gave my entrance exams. I know what that culture is all about. I was reasonably good at it, but wasn't good enough to get CS in where I wanted to. And now, point I wanted to make is now looking back on that, I tell all of my friends who went to college here all the time, which is, when all Indian uncles will ask us, "Tune to America mein college kiya? That must be easy. You don't know how tough IIT is." And what I tell them is it's not really an IIT versus American college thing, but I've worked with so many great IITians at Glean, and the one thing I see is, when you come from India and you come from a culture like that, the hunger to succeed is not a 5-year thing. It's not a 10-year thing. That work ethic shows in your 30s to 50s, because I tell all my Cornell friends this, by the way, when you're 30, you will want to go on ski trips, you will want to go traveling, you will want to post on Instagram. Do you know what the IIT Delhi CS guys will want to do? Not that. They will work 80 hours a week. They will get married. They will have 2 kids. They will live in the Bay Area. They don't care how glamorous it is because they care about success in a way that you cannot understand. And I think that's where, not just Indians overall, but even between Indians, different sets of Indians have very different drives. And one of the reasons I think that is because when you go through that hardship, the opportunity just means so much to you. And even for myself, I came here for undergrad. I feel like I don't truly understand the hunger as much as people who come after their undergrad, because for them it's it's much more life and death. The culture is much more of a clash. So anyway, that's a little
100%. I agree. We integrate more with the culture in America. They integrate a little bit less, but at the same time, they have more hunger because they are more.
I think they have more hunger, honestly.
Really? But why?
I think they have more hunger because we get used to the American way of life. Where you want American things, you understand American culture a little bit more. Whereas for them, it's listen, I'm making obvious generalizations here, but most of them it's listen, I'm very Indian. I know how much I've had to struggle to get to this point. I'm not going to give it up right now. This is still a land where I have to make it in, and you can see that hunger sort of translate, 5-10 years into their career.
So what does it make you feel when you see our contributions are high and you see racism like Siddharth ke saath hua tha that I hope you will be dead soon. I'm sure you will be dead soon. And like specifically your replies to Arvind, you know, that these are very racist replies you get and you face, and you posted as well, it's racism for them until it's India. So
I think my view is this. Number one, I don't get emotional about things. I think it's a pretty critical thing when you work. I think it's for everybody. There's some element of, call it being stoic, call it whatever, and I think it's not just me. I think it applies to a lot of people where, if somebody, someone put it very well. I forget who it was that said this or where I heard this, but someone said, the minute you lose your cool, you've lost that battle. And the number one thing you cannot do in any situation, whether it's relationships, whether it's any situation, you have lost the situation when you lose control. They are trying to make you lose control. Everyone is trying to make you lose control in any given situation. People might try to push you to the edge, but if you fall off the edge, that's on you. So I think rule number one for me is I never get emotional about that. It might seem emotional on Twitter. I say some funny thing, I say some stuff, but I'm not emotional about it. Like racism, it happens. That's fine. What do I do? Is really the question for me. And, I think it's unfortunate that it happens. For me, I like to understand, why does it happen? Why do you feel a certain way about Indians? I'm very much a truth seeker in how I approach these kinds of things. Why does it happen to Indians? Did it happen to other kinds of people in the past? Why did it happen to other kinds of people in the past? Is it a skin color thing? Is it a culture thing? What is the root of this? And I think fundamentally, the reason why racism against Indians is happening right now is because people have seen racism against black people for a very long time. They're over it. It's done. We don't understand it. Then they saw there was Jews. There was a lot of racism against Jews in the early, right after the war and everything. But it got over. It happened. People understand. Then Asians. There was a lot of, again, non-Indian Asians. There's a lot of racism against them. It's still there, but still well more understood. They're more in the cultural mix of things. And India is sort of the next one. And I think it's just a part of being a minority in a different set of countries where it's bound to happen. There is a cultural clash. People look at the culture and they think, oh my God, that's so weird. It's so different. I'm not used to it. That's normal, I think. The real question is, okay, where do we go from here? And I think when I think of it, as Indians, our job is to just present ourselves in the best light possible. We do incredible things. We have data to back it up. There are incredible Indians, it goes without saying, that have done things in the past and are going to continue to do things. And so I don't lose my cool and I just say, dude, look at the stuff that we've done. And I think a part of it is look, dude, we can be funny. We can be this. We can be all of these things. We are actually not very different from each other. And so the racism kind of shouldn't exist. But the more you try to, I like Siddharth, but I don't love his approach all the time, right? I don't think the right fight to racism is oh, screw you, and oh, I don't let me show you that you do this wrong. That antagonism never ends well. Really, the way racism ends in any sort of situation is, you know what? You're actually not that different from me. And that's how, we Indians should be primed with racism. There's so much racism within the different parts of India too. Some South Indians see someone from North India, they think a couple of things, but then you become friends when you're we like the same movies, it's quite nice. Or we like the same, it's quite... And so, I think that's the way to deal with it, not, sort of punch back kind of attitude. It doesn't work.
Yeah, totally. Coming on the common ground, unko realize karna ki yaar, we both are taxpayers, we like the same things. Why there's point of any racism? Now, coming back to the US economy part, do you think US economy is on a rise or decline since we see revenue of Tesla and Uber at least declining?
I don't know, man. This is a bigger question for all in the short term, I think it's on a rise. In the long term, I think there's some pretty existential threats to the US economy. One of the biggest ones is, where will the working labor population come from? Population decline overall in America and China. Those are the three big threats. I mean, already, I work in venture right now. Whenever I see a hardware company, hardware is always sort of a dirty word in venture, not because we don't think it's cool. Everyone thinks hardware is cool. It's because hardware businesses are very tough to make work. They're not recurring revenue businesses. They're very capital intensive. And when you look at these businesses, the first thing we think is, man, how are you going to compete with China? There's no way. They're going to be able to take whatever R&D that you have and manufacture it at 1/10 of the cost, because like, have you been to Shenzhen? It's insane. Yes. Like the kind of things they've done to their city, the kind of supply chains they have, the access to cheap, good, high quality materials is insane. And in the last decade or two, and obviously we can talk about the DeepSeek moment too, but in the last decade or two, they've shown they also have the R&D on top of that. They're not just a manufacturing shop like the Foxconn to iPhones. They're more than that. Like they can actually build their own robots, and you see that with things like, what's that company called? Unitree.
Yes, I saw it at CES. It was mind-blowing.
It was mind-blowing, right? And the fact that they can sell one of those dogs for $1,600, like tell me when Boston Dynamics is able to sell any of those dogs. So they're never going to be able to, because you can't sell it for $1,600 if you manufacture in America, because America doesn't have labor arbitrage anymore. So how do you wrestle with that on a global landscape when you can no longer be the supply of labor, because people want to get paid a lot here. If people want to get paid a lot, materials cost a lot, then the actual product will cost a lot. So I think those are the three factors. Long term, the US has to figure out how to make it work. Short term, I think it's fine. If you look at all of these tech companies and innovation, I would say a large part of the global innovation still comes from America. Most of the social media networks still operate out of America for the world. NVIDIA is still an American company. Maybe, many people say this, I don't know how much of a conspiracy theory this is, but the moment, and this might even happen in the next 5 years, the moment China figures out how to replace ASML is sort of the biggest bottleneck in the tech supply chain. ASML is this company that makes EUV lithography machines.
Dutch company.
Yes, Dutch company that TSMC then uses to make a lot of the chips. Once China has that part of the supply chain domestically, and they're obviously working on it, then essentially China has almost no dependency on the tech funnel to anything global, and then they can sort of go with it their own way. So I think that's going to be a very key moment in the arc of sort of history as we see.
100%. Adding on to that, it's almost impossible to compete with China. Like imagine tariffs. Even tariffs are of course making China struggle, and US wants to, like US consumes more than it creates, manufacturing at least, and China makes more than it consumes. So what's happening is, like, it has so much. Now, no other country has that much manufacturing power. Even after tariffs, how can tariffs be stopped? Like, a made in China product will go to Indonesia. They will change the label to made in Indonesia. And now it'll come to America tariff-free. So it's impossible to compete. What do you think?
I honestly, out of my pay grade, I don't know how these things will end up. I don't even think people who are in the government knows how these things will play out. We'll see. The things that I really focus on in my job and the things I care about the most is how can America innovate for the world? But it's at a much higher part of the supply chain. It's not at really the discussion. The discussion really doesn't go to the manufacturing layer. It's primarily software. And even in software, there's a bunch of different challenges, right? Like we have challenges on thinking about, everyone has the question, to what degree does AI replace jobs? Obviously, there's some people who think everything, some people who think nothing. The answer is probably somewhere in the middle. And there's deeper questions about labor for software too. Like, do you hire? I've worked at Glean and I've seen this myself. It's so expensive to hire in the Bay Area. What does that mean for how you build a company? Do you continue to build companies in the Bay Area? Do you build it in a distributed way across the world? Those are most of the problems sort of that I constrain myself to.
Sure. So now, since you're a principal investor at Glean, you have a more than $1 billion fund at Menlo Ventures. So let's say you're finding the next $1 trillion company, and you're finding that. Do you think it's going to come from India, China, or US, where you are currently investing into, and which industry it's going to be from?
If you look at the history of it, and these are questions, I'm still only 1 year into ventures, so I love to ask myself these questions on a fundamental level, like, why do venture firms invest primarily in Bay Area companies? And there's many reasons. I'm probably not going to be exhaustive, but there's a lot. The few of the reasons are, number one, people underestimate culture as a force to create companies. And I've lived in India, and one of the reasons, actually you mentioned earlier, one of the reasons I wanted to go back to India is to see what that difference was. Many other reasons, but so what the difference in culture really was. And one of the things in SF, in the Bay Area specifically, that is different from even the rest of America is the ability to dream the dream, which is, easy to say. It's very, very, very hard to do. Like in the Bay Area is the only place I know where people will be 23 years old, have no money, have a $1 million a year job offer and say, you know what, I don't care. I'm going to live in a 1-bedroom apartment in the middle of nowhere, and all I want to do is build my own company. There's no place in the world where people do that. Not in New York. People would never, they think it's crazy. Like, why the hell would you do that? So culture goes a long way to it. Like at the end, that's number one. Number two is businesses are easy to build here, kind of intermixed with the culture because you're surrounded by people who are also dreamers, right? You're surrounded by people who are also building and people you're selling to in the beginning. When you try to build a company in India, for example, obviously there's many other ways to cut this, but if you try to build a software company in India, who are you going to sell that software to? India doesn't have a lot of software buyers. In America, you can walk next door, make a few phone calls, walk to the company across the street and be like, hey, we have an interesting thing. Do you want to try it? And not only will they take that call, they will be interested because that culture is there of innovation, of let's try something new, let's stay ahead of the pack. Very few cities in the world have. They're more traditional cultures. Like, I know what works, let me just stick to this. I don't want to try this new stuff. That's probably a scam. And in India, you're very naturally gravitated to that mindset. I know how, you know how Indian culture is. It's like if someone tries to sell me something, my first reaction is like, probably not. I don't want to buy your stuff. Here, it's very different because of that culture. And the last thing I'll say, third is, talent is still very much attracted to the Bay Area. I mean, we have the 2 universities, you have a lot of the investors, you have a lot of the big tech companies. So it's just easier to build and grow a team here. There are difficulties, obviously, but it is easier than most parts of the world. And so for those 3 reasons, I think people just like the Bay Area. And like, I'll touch on the investor point a little bit. It's really tough as an investor to invest in something even 3 hours away.
Really?
Time zone wise, because investing, people think of it investing kind of like the stock market, right? You're like, paisa dalunga and we'll see where it goes.
Gee.
And that's not really how it works when it comes to venture investing because you're partnering with a company at a very, very early stage. You have to make sure, number one, is it a scam? How do you make sure it's not a scam? You have to meet the guy. Like, you have to talk to the guy. You have to build a relationship with the founder. That's how you make sure. How does this person think? How does this person work? You have to hire for them. Like, it's a very hands-on job. So when someone's 3 hours away, it makes that job very difficult on a day-to-day basis. If I do invest in a company far away, I have to go fly there. I have to spend working sessions with them. I have to go meet the team. I want to know the updates. Like, I want to be close to that company. That's why you probably want to be where your investors are at. It makes life a lot easier. It makes the probability of success a little bit more. And you see those in the statistics when you even compare SF startups versus New York startups, far less India and everywhere else. So, that's why.
I agree. Because of that, San Francisco is the only place I've seen where VCs run behind founders as much as founders run behind VCs.
Yeah.
You go to some places like Stanford, there are places where they offer, first of all, $20,000 a year, whole area where people sleep on single mattress, the whole area. It's $20,000 a month, and those VCs give it for free to Stanford students just with one hope that they will get to fund the seed round when they do a startup, when the startup comes out. It's like -1 to 0 at that stage. And they want to see the next DoorDash, Airbnb, from their fund.
Exactly.
So it's just insane. That's why SF as a whole has a big moat here in winning the biggest funds.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have to do that a lot. 100%. 100%.
You chase a lot of founders.
I've chased founders all the time. Half the time we had such a hard time scheduling is because I was chasing other founders. Founders, the great founders are, they're so hard to find, and once you find them, they're like gold. Like, you just can't let them go.
Because you invest in the person, not in their idea.
You mostly invest in the person.
Here an important point comes that Indian startups are struggling, which you mentioned in one of the last podcasts, that Indian startups, at least which are consumer startups, 10% of those startups, you don't see them making revenue or becoming profitable even the next 10 years. Can you add on that? Because even I saw this tweet, the Krutim AI from Ola, which wants to compete with LLMs, people are tweeting it's a shit show. So can you elaborate?
I think the first thing I will say is, there's obviously India is going to be a hotbed for innovation. There have been tremendous companies that came out of India. So I know, because this always happens whenever you say anything about India, is like, That is true. Like, there are fantastic companies that have come out of the Indian startup scenes. Everything I say is despite those. Because I also want to see India become better and better. And I can see the clear gaps between where the Indian ecosystem is and where the Bay Area ecosystem is. Let's talk about the Indian ecosystem. Number one issue with the Indian ecosystem is the power imbalance between VCs and founders. The power imbalance exists for several reasons. There's very few VCs and they feel like they have ball control. So founders come to them, they get to pick. That's number one. Number two, the amount of capital that these VCs have. Usually when you're trying to size the amount of capital in venture, the real bottleneck is how many new ideas can form in a given period of time. And that isn't fully elastic. Like, you can't just say, if I fund the economy $100 billion, then I will get 100 billion times 10 worth of market value from the economy. There's only a certain amount of founders that will happen at any given point of time, population-wise, and if you do all the math, and there's only a certain amount of them that will work. There's only a certain amount of markets that are able to be captured at any given point of time. So
India one, let's say, right?
In any market, but in India specifically for sure. So if you raise too much money, what does a venture firm have to do? A venture firm has to take a fund and they tell their LPs, their investors, they're telling them, I'm going to get you better returns than the market. If you want to get better returns in the market, say the market returns 15%, you're looking at 20%. Now, a startup only exits within a 7 to 10 year, a fund is a 7 to 10 year life cycle. So if you want to get 15 to 20% for your LPs on a 7 to 10 year life cycle, you do the math, you'll probably have to 4x that fund. If you have to 4x a fund, then you have to get into a lot of companies early. And usually the way venture works is some of them have to be an outsized success and they will drive a lot of your returns. If you raise too much money, then you're not going to be able to 4x the fund because your outcomes are not going to be there. So what happens in India is because they've raised so much money, you end up funding these companies more than the value they deserve to have. And for some of that in early stage, it's obvious. Like, obviously you fund a company, I gave some seed company a $30 billion valuation. That number is pretty meaningless. Like, it usually doesn't have any revenue. What does that valuation mean? It doesn't mean anything. The problem is when you keep doing that and then the companies never go public, then you have basically a bubble in the private markets. So you've deployed all this money to companies that are never going to return money. And that happens in America, but in India...
Rivian example, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know exactly the Rivian story, because Rivian, I think, is now public, and so it's not... the investors might have lost some money, but it didn't lose all of it.
Yes.
So in India, you'll see examples of companies, in 2021, you saw this in America too, where, say, the revenue is at 1 million, 2 million, but the valuation is at 1 billion, 2 billion, things like that. And those companies, you're like, okay, the odds of this working out are rare.
Yes.
And so there's a lot, and there was some analysis done on this where if you look at all the Indian unicorns, I think 80% of them are not profitable, which is fine, but most of them don't even have a path to profitability. A lot of them are basically fake unicorns. Like, someone has pumped in money into a company to make it a unicorn. It's a bad investment decision, and these are not unicorns, and they will eventually die. So that's another problem. So inflation of companies in the Indian ecosystem. But, some would argue, this happens in America too. So that's fine. The third point in the Indian ecosystem is, this is probably the biggest one, the outcomes are just not as big. And usually in a venture game, all VCs don't win, but even the funds that have to work, 1 or 2 companies drive most of your returns in a fund. And so those companies have to be enormous outcomes for you to actually get that 4x on your fund. If you look at outcomes in America, the obvious ones, like Facebook.
Yes.
You look at Palantir today, like a new age one, that's a $250 billion company. And then you look at the outcomes in India, even the good outcomes. Like, you look at Zomato, you look at Nykaa, you look at Flipkart. I think Flipkart was an exception because it was a weird sort of acquisition play, but the biggest outcome, I think, is still Flipkart. I think that was a $16 billion outcome. 16 and 250 are very different. 16 and 1 trillion are very different. So even in the best case, your outcomes in India are still capped. So for those 3 reasons, I think the Indian ecosystem for venture, it's harder to invest in Indian startups. And then the last sort of meta reason is, I think, speaking to Krutrim specifically, one of my goals when I was in India is to see if this was I love India, I know people on Twitter might not always see this because I say a lot of negative stuff because I feel strongly about it, but I love India. I would love India to succeed in many ways. But when I see the kind of companies that get built in India, these are not technology forward companies, in my opinion. Most of the great successes, if you look at Nike, you look at Zomato, you look at Flipkart, they're tech-enabled businesses. They're dhandas, right?
Yes.
Like enabled by tech. The tech allows you to reach a huge market very quickly, so it enables you to scale. But essentially, like Flipkart is not a software. Flipkart is not a software business. It is selling you stuff. It's an e-commerce business. Nike, e-commerce business. Zomato, food business. Like it's the tech is just enabling the connection, but the business is not software. And I personally think that, well, I love software and tech forward businesses. I like businesses like Anthropic. Like we are big investors in Anthropic at Menlo. That's the kind of business I like. High margin businesses, extremely like Anthropic can scale. I can't reveal the actual numbers, but they can scale from zero to, enormous outcomes in 1 year. These businesses were not able to scale like that. Their margins aren't like that, So India, I think the main thing it lacks is that culture of having software and tech innovation. I don't think it's a problem. I think it's a market maturity thing. India is not at the stage where they're going to be competitive there. Look how long it took China to be competitive there. It took China nearly 40 years of change to go step by step. Like, let's do manufacturing. Let's be a little bit richer. Let's build up our cities. Then let's start companies. Then let's take over higher and higher manufacturing. And now we're getting to a point where it's like, I think we're doing cutting edge research. And I think some of the stuff that we make is better than America. That's in the last 10 years. That takes a long time. So India's not there where it can come and say, hey, we're going to make the best LLM. I think that's just not going to happen in this era. But maybe if we play the cards right, in 20 years, maybe earlier than that, I think India will be at a point where it can do cutting edge R&D. So that's kind of my answer to that.
Yeah, but like if you think about India's rise recently, IISc Bangalore became top 100 in the world recently in research. And like if research rises, similar to what the research done by DeepSeek, it was incredible research. If there's more investment in research, more of these competitors rise, it can improve as well. So it is on the rise at least.
I agree. And then immigration has a weird counter effect there because, most of the best researchers I know in India will just come here.
Like Emigration.
Immigration to America. But
yeah.
Yes, immigration is also an issue there because the fact of the matter is like researchers have a much harder life in India than they do here. If you're a researcher, your options are go live in IISc versus come to Stanford. Like here you basically get everything paid for and you live a perfectly good life. In IISc, things are probably not all rosy. The funding here is infinite. Like when I was in a research lab at Cornell, like I would look at the lab and I'm just thinking like all of this equipment probably costs $50 million. Like there's no way. And my professor is just like, yeah, do whatever you want. In India, that would never happen. Like I'm just thinking out loud, even to get access to the computer lab, we'd have to like wipe our feet, clean our hands, and then you could touch a computer because that's worth too much in India. You don't want to ruin it. And here, people are like, yeah, just come, use the lab, come whenever, you have free access. These are very, very highly specialized, expensive equipment. So, just the environment to do research, India needs a lot of money and spending to catch up. So I think it'll happen over time, and the trajectory is good.
Now, what do you see the future of tech industry again? So, like with AI agents, with DeepSeek, and, I think in Bay Area, when I attend events, they say that AI agents, AI is a progression, not a replacement. But especially when these big companies like Salesforce and like Meta, they talk about we're not going to hire software engineers in 2025, even though some of my friends said they hired two after he said that. So there is a huge, conflict in things said in Bay Area in some events versus these big CEOs saying, oh, software engineering is over. So
let's start by saying, look, a CEO's job is to sell. So a CEO is going to say, any given CEO is going to say stuff that is helpful for their business, whether they believe it or not. That's always been the case. And on the other side, there's incentive too. So like on the other side, a software engineer is obviously going to say, I'm not going to be replaced by AI. So you have to, I think the first thing to understand is each side has their biases. One will say, I will never get replaced. One will say, I would love to sell more shit. So given those two, the real answer, I think, is always in between. And the real answer is, okay, let's take just software. I don't know about replacement, but I speak to companies today that can do with 3 to 10 engineers what was just not possible 5 years ago. Like it wasn't possible to churn out this many features and this much code with 3 engineers, no matter how long you spent coding. And you can just see, that's kind of obvious when you use tools like Cursor, when you use things like Sonnet to code, it is somewhat insane, even to me as a technologist, that this is possible. Now, you can't push that to the limit and say, okay, therefore software engineering is dead. Clearly, you still need 3 of them, right? Like, it's not like one non-technical CEO just coding, like writing some stuff on Cursor. There is some technical stuff involved, but the amount you need to do the same thing is reduced. I love the comparison of self-driving cars. I think it's a very apt comparison with AI because just like with self-driving cars, a lot of people thought easy problem, look, I can get so good so quickly. But it turns out the hard part of the problem is getting to 90% is easy. Getting to 99% is hard. Getting from 99 to 100 is very, very, very hard. It takes like years and years of perfection to really get that last mile. But we're starting to see examples of it. Like you can go take a Waymo right outside right now.
It has 50% of the rideshare market in San Francisco.
Which is crazy.
Every other ride.
Okay. But how long did it take to get there? Waymo, if you read the articles, 10 years ago there were articles being like, oh my god, full self-driving is going to take over everything. Then there was the trough of disillusionment where they're like, okay, look, full self-driving is not going to take over everything. And now you're at a point where it's like, oh my god, it's actually working. And that's that famous graph which goes like this and then kind of plateaus. And that's the same thing with AI. We might be at like the peak of a little bit of a hype chain, but then it falls and people are like, oh, it doesn't do everything. But at the end of the day, I think it's without question that we're in a position where AI does a lot. I don't know how much, I don't know if it replaces software engineers, but it does a lot. And I can already see that already. Like, let's talk about, in the Bay Area, people love to talk about software engineering, very high-skilled professions that we all know and care about. But, most of the world doesn't do software engineering. Like, most of the world actually does extremely boring, manual, tedious work. And when I go and see companies and I see the kinds of stuff they're doing, I'll give you an example. A very niche example. There's a company, I won't name it, but in the complicated healthcare system in India, in America, where you have to bill your insurance for a certain thing you get done, and the insurance company has to verify whether all these guidelines are met before they can approve or disapprove of your claim. That is a completely manual process. They'll read through stuff, they read through your unstructured notes, doctor notes, they read through diagnoses, prescriptions, what you got done, what the doctor said, and they have to spend a bunch of time to make a call. That is almost completely automatable with AI. You literally just have to feed all these documents, create this interesting, complicated agent pipeline, and then it just tells you, here's the things that it meets, here's the things I'm not really sure it meets, and it'll go a step further, and this part blew my mind. If it doesn't have the information to make a decision, it will place a call with AI automatically to the doctor or the provider or anybody, verify on the call what it needs to verify, log it, make the claim done. That's completely automated. So there are clearly some jobs that are being automated as we speak, and then there's some that are very difficult, that will take longer and it'll keep getting better, like software. But I'm really excited for the kind of value that it's like the change to the world we're about to see. That's incredible to me, just as a technologist, to see how much AI can do right now. And I think most of the world just doesn't understand how good these models are. I get to see companies, fortunately, that are on the cutting edge of this. So whenever I see a demo, sometimes I'm just like, I don't even remember what I was going to ask this company because this demo blew my mind. So anyway, that's I think, a summary.
So let's go deeper into AI and AI agents. So you invested in Anthropic. So Anthropic released the first computer agent, computer use, and it's based on detecting what's on your computer and based on that clicking through. And OpenAI comes with Operator, which is based on connecting the APIs, so it does the job. So both are on the rise. So what do you think is the future of AI agents? You think both will go to perfection or one is going to win?
I think if you reason about how it played out for LLMs, there's usually one person who takes the lead and then everyone else catches up. It's sort of like a race. Like it's very similar to, in many examples in sports, right? Like the classic one is back in the day, no one thought you could break the 4-minute mile barrier, and then once it was broken, then everyone broke it. And there's similar things with cricket. Like I remember when I started watching, I'm a huge cricket fan. I started watching cricket. You couldn't cross 300, and 400 was unthinkable of. And then once, they crossed, I think South Africa did the first one or somebody did the first one that crossed 400. There's so many other scores above 400 now. So I think, technology also evolves in that way. Someone's probably going to take the lead and do it first, and then other people are going to catch up and try to do the same thing. But going into the technicals of how operator and computer use and these kinds of things work, I think right now we're seeing very, very early days, and it's very easy to be disillusioned by it because it's so slow for some subset of tasks that humans do really quickly.
True.
Right? It takes like, okay, I'm looking at the screen, thinking for 3 seconds. Okay, I know I have to click this button, click button. That's really boring, and that's not really showing the power of these models. And really, I think over time, vision is a big bottleneck. People don't talk about this enough right now, but vision for models is too slow and too inaccurate for the needs of computer use. When we do vision, it's kind of one of the most incredible things humans do. We don't have to look at a screen, stare at it, and think, I have to click login. No, we just I know what to click, this is that. We could basically do it without even looking for a new page. We just kind of know. And the kind of 2 things I'm really excited about technologically, I'm not going to call a winner, I don't know, no one knows. The one thing is for vision to get way, way better and way, way more accurate. Today, vision is just not there. Mm-hmm. The second thing is, I think, this idea of training on software. And what I mean by that is, today, how the model works is it sees a screen and it has to do some reasoning to figure out the next step. Like I've gone into, I don't know what a good example, I've gone into DoorDash and I'm trying to order some food. Okay, what do I do next? It looks like I'm looking at restaurants. But it should know that. The human doesn't I don't go into DoorDash and think, what do I have to do? I kind of know what DoorDash is. I scroll through, I'm like, this is where I order from, boom, 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 done. So I think in the future what happens is when you have this idea of playing with itself, computers playing with itself on a specific software and creating a sort of reward function of tasks that it has to do in that software, it automatically learns different software. So the next time you go into DoorDash, it doesn't have to think, it knows because it's done it before. And if the UI changes a little bit, it'll be like, oh, well, it looks like the UI has changed a little bit, but I still fundamentally know what I have to do, and it'll go ahead and do that. And that's going to be the next big unlock, which I think will quickly go from humans thinking this is really dumb to humans being like, oh my God, this is so smart because their software even I don't know, and it's able to do everything in it. So that's what I think the future of that is.
Both can win. Computer-based, which is so slow, it can win as well. And API integration with agents, that can win as well.
I think mostly the computer-based way is going to win because APIs are just not going to exist for the long tail of things on the internet.
Excellent. Yeah. Now, for so many people watching who want to build AI agents and win this race, you have seen so many cool projects. If you want to fund tomorrow, what kind of project you would like to see to be funded in AI agent space?
Really, I hate to have this answer, but the problem is, one, most of the common ideas have 10 people already working on it. So I don't think it's an idea battle anymore. In the idea sphere, I would say the things that I would like to see is people sort of pushing the frontier of what they know. I always tell founders this, and this has been my observation. There's often a view amongst founders that I should build what the VCs want to see. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just the incorrect view. I mean, if you look at every single generational company, almost every single generation company was not what the VC wanted to see at that point. Facebook was not a thing. Like people weren't funding social networks at scale when Facebook came out. People weren't funding Google, slightly different because there were a bunch of search engines. But DoorDash, again, it wasn't the idea that made DoorDash great. Hundreds of people have had that idea and it failed every single time. Really, what really matters when you're building a company is, you should be authentic to the problem. Like if you understand the problem, honestly, screw what everybody else thinks. If you feel the problem, go solve that problem. Figure it out. VCs can help you figure out things like, okay, the market, I don't know if it's there, or here's a strategy that might not work, here's some concerns, but you are the person who is driving the solution. You should figure out the problem. Don't think about what VCs want. The second thing I think is people underestimate how hard it is to build stuff. It's very easy to put a slide deck together. It's very easy to put a website together. It's very hard to run a company. Running a company is not about the idea. It's about hiring people. It's about executing. And it's about the ability to run very hard for a very long period of time. Like so many people fail for those reasons. They don't know how to scale themselves. They don't know how to scale a company. They don't know how to hire good people. It's people treat it very often like a side project. Like, me and my friend, we're doing this thing, we built a GitHub repository, now we can have a startup. Great. I know, I've seen all the shows, I know how glamorized startups are, but that's not why you should be building a company. You should be building a company knowing that you're going to put 7 years of your life into it, sacrifice all your relationships and money. It's a sacrifice. That's what makes success happen. So when I look for founders, personally, yeah, some ideas matter a little bit more than others, but what I really look for is the drive, the ability to execute. The team is what really, really matters. And you can see, like, one quote I like to say is, that founder can run through walls. And when you meet somebody who can do that, you know exactly what that means. It's like nothing will stop this person. Honestly, if I say no to that person, even that won't stop that person. That person will make this thing work one way or the other. That's the kind of drive like I want to see.
Go-getter.
Go-getter.
So can you break down what traits you see in a person who is going to be like, go-getter or break the walls?
A lot of them. So the easiest one is work ethic. Like, I know there's a lot of debate on the internet, especially about the amount of hours a week you work and all of this stuff. And so I don't want to put like an hours a week thing. But the fact of the matter is, go-getters put their work over everything else. Not always. Like, eventually the company starts working, they can take a step back. But when it's time to build the company, you really need to do that. So number one is you have to have dedication to the problem, and you have to really be able to have the drive to always be on and working on something. That's number one. Number two, I think, is a good mix of being able to take in input from people, but also having, your own ideas. There's too much of each one are not always great, but the biggest go-getters, they're so curious. And it's in a way that I tell founders all the time, because again, a lot of people have this sort of myth that a founder is just an overconfident person. Like, yeah, hoga, this is my thing, you have no idea, dude, it's going to be the next big thing. Look, most great founders are not like that. Most great founders, they speak that way once it's working. Like, yeah, now I know it's going to be a thing, it's working. Most great founders in the beginning are curious. They're like, hey, what are you seeing in this space? Is this sort of resonating with you? Is this working? Because eventually that's the kind of mindset that makes you able to move around and figure out what works. A lot of startups is like navigating a journey and then finding the right thing that you have to tackle. It's not like, I have an idea, I'm going to execute on an idea, everyone's going to love what I do, and then I'm going to be a success. That's not how it works. And so that curiosity, the humility combined with confidence is a very rare thing to see in people. And you know this when you speak to second-time, third-time founders. They never come across, no matter how many companies they've sold at whatever valuation, and they will come to me. Often I'm more junior to them, and the first thing they will ask is, so what are you seeing in the market? Is that really working? Is this really working? And I love it. Like, they're genuinely curious, because they know that's what will make them successful, not just like, oh, I've done this 2 times before, let me tell you how it's done. You don't know anything. So that's one. And then the third one I think that's underappreciated is ability to inspire other people. I think this is often a problem that younger founders face, because people are inspired by the younger founders. There are many successful stories of younger founders, but in almost all of those stories, the younger founders were able to hire because the business was taking off beyond a shadow of a doubt. Like, it was clearly working, and then they were able to hire the right people. When the business is not clearly working, it's very hard. Like, times are tough. Like, who will want to work for you? What have you done? Your business isn't working. You haven't figured it out, and you want to hire me to come work for you. Why will I work for you? So that ability to sort of inspire people to a vision, to a cause, is, I think, extremely important factor in whether you can make it work. Because great companies, much to everybody's disbelief, let's take Elon, for example. People love to give Elon credit for all of these companies. And I love a lot of things Elon does too. But if you go into those companies, the reason those companies work is not just because of Elon. It's because Elon has hired absolutely amazing talent at the top. And he has no time to waste to keep useless people around. So if you look at the leadership in SpaceX, the leadership in Tesla, these are the most incredible engineers on the planet. And that's what you need, because he's able to inspire them to come join and work with him. Not everybody else is. So that's what he does really well. So, those are three, for example, things that I look for when it comes to founders that have that go-getter mentality.
Yeah, for that there's a quote as well, right? If you hire 10 people who are about your company's culture, the cult, they represent like 100% of the culture. When they hire other people, it propagates. And so even if 10 top people there, they are like strong core values, what Elon Musk has or whatever the cult is, then the 100 people they hire, still the 10% top has that culture, it goes down.
It percolates.
It percolates.
Correct.
So culture and hiring the right people, and A came, Mac has a saying that they hired A players, 10 A players, which did make the Mac so amazing what it is right now.
Exactly.
So now here the question comes for me is, what is success? Like personally for you, what is success being in Bay Area? What is success from a startup point of view and personally?
I think, that's a very deep question, and I think about this a lot. Fundamentally, I think success just means being happy in the long run. Happiness, there's two forms of happiness. There's say, call it type 1, type 2 happiness. Type 1 happiness is when you're out at a party, you're having a good time with your friends, feels great, but sometimes next morning won't feel so great. Type 2 happiness is really fulfillment. It's like, I'm happy because my parents are okay. I'm happy because my family's doing well. I'm happy that I'm in a good place in my life, like general fulfillment. And I obviously I at least, maybe not obvious, but I spent a lot of time thinking about these things from reading books or reading research and seeing what works for other people. And I think the main two things that have worked for people in the longer run is, number one, relationships and with your friends, your significant other, your family. That is always going to be number one in the long run. When people talk about, there's this fantastic study, longitudinal study from Harvard about what makes people happy when they're on their deathbed, and almost all of them are powerful, strong relationships. And I think I take that very seriously, in the sense where, look, you need to have this in the back of your mind all the time, that no matter how much you're chasing some other forms of success that are also important, if your friend needs you, you're there for them. That's not questionable. And that's something you have to internalize to make that decision constantly. So I think that's extremely important. You have to just be there for the people in your life that matter. That's number one. I think number two is, you have to have, I think, some sort of income. I don't think for everybody it's the same amount. For different people it's different amount, but I definitely think it's much harder to be happy when you don't have any money. So for me, those are the two main things that are fundamental. And then the rest of the things I think are different for different people. And for me personally, I am very happy when I can be a curious person, when I learn stuff. I think that will never change. I love reading and learning and talking to my friends about the stuff that I'm reading and learning. That's very important to me. And I also get very happy when my work excites me. And you introduced me, when we were talking before, you introduced me, is I've jumped through a bunch of careers. The reason I've jumped through careers, I think, and honestly, my friends also tell me this, is the reason I think I'm a happy person in general is because I don't think that much. I genuinely don't think that hard about it. I know a lot of my friends, I know a very Indian thing to do, which is yeah, but if I do this, then 2 years later, I'll do this, and then I'll get this compensation. If I get this compensation, then I can do this, and then I'll get this outcome, and then I'll be cool.
Then I'll be happy.
And I think that argument a lot of people do. And for me, it's if you are not, I learned this earlier on in my career, thankfully, if I am not happy in my next 40 hours in the week when I'm working, I'm not going to be happy. I need to make the next 40 hours happy first before I can think of 1 saal mein kya hoga, 2 saal mein kya hoga. I need to do that first. And so for me, that's extremely important. And in the long run, this is advice I got early and I didn't really understand it, but whenever you're making critical decisions, it's good to trust your intuition. Too much planning will make you very unhappy. But that's what I do. I think there is an aspect of career fulfillment and progress, but really for me, that's driven to the impact of the work I do and the ability for that work to inspire me. So those are some of the things I think in the long run.
Now, my last question would be, what is success for startups? Your startup, Glean AI, is winning the race of engagement in AI. And some startups win the race of users. Some startups win the race of revenue. What do you evaluate? What is success?
The first finance class I took in college, I had a professor at Cornell who was very known for, he would come into class any given lecture and he would call on somebody and he would always ask the same question. In lecture 5, middle of the semester, and he'd be like, what is a business? He'll just ask again and again, and he drove it into our heads, which is a business is an entity that makes profit. Everything else is not a business. It's just not relevant. And look, you can be a mission-driven company, you can want to put something into the world, you can have opinions on how the product should look and how it should function. All of that is great, but you should never lose track of the one definition of what is a startup. It's a business. A business is a company that makes profit, and eventually the only success metric is, do you make profit? And if you do not make profit, you are not a business. You might not make profit now, and you can say maybe 10 years later I'll make profit and I have a plan to do that. It's going to be incredible. That's fine. But eventually, that is the foundation of what makes a business work. If you do not make profit for long enough, you are not in business. You are out of business because you will lose all your money. So that's number one. I think Glean and OpenAI and Anthropic and all of these companies have different sort of paths to get to there. They have different strategies to get to there, but ultimately that is the goal.
How did you think you win the race for AI for enterprises, like with Glean AI, with highest engagement?
One of the hardest, there's many, I can talk about Glean for maybe 3 hours, but the one of the interesting challenges with making enterprise search widely used is you have to justify the ROI of how this search and assistant product works. Justifying ROI for search and assistant is not easy because it's very hard to say like you actually found something and it actually saved you time. But one good proxy is at least people are using it more and more. So in many ways, engagement is a proxy for it's adding value. If people are coming back to a search, then probably it's useful. Now the problem is search on its own, and we've learned this at Google and many other places, but it's not a very addictive product. People inherently don't want to come back to it. So you have to design many other features around the product to make it engaging, to remind people to come back to it. And some of those tactics are very simple, like, hey, telling someone to use a new surface is a lot of friction. Let's meet them where they are. If they ask a question in Slack, Glean can just go and answer that question for you. You don't have to do anything. You just ask a question. If you're asking it to another person in a group channel, it'll just come in, it'll answer the question for you. So things like that. If you go try to search in Google Drive, Glean will just take over with its Chrome extension, the search bar, because we think our search is better, and you can search through the Google Drive docs. Those are small sort of twists in behavior to get people to be like, yeah, Glean is great. Glean does exist. And I think growth and engagement specifically is a lot of those small things that eventually then we measure it, and then actually makes people come back, and we see the daily active use is very high. We made a feed of trending documents in your company. We made another feed of like documents your colleagues are looking at that you should probably look at. These are all things that people are like, I want to check my Glean. Is there something I missed? And those are the features that people think and like, okay, I'm going to come back to this product.
So you're chasing where the user is rather than user coming back to you. They don't need to have a reminder, I need to go to Glean. You're right there. Awesome. Thank you so much, Deedy. It was wonderful talking to you.
So
great
good to talk
insights.
to you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.